All right, thank you, Noah. Good morning. If you have ever moved from one place to another, moved to a new city, perhaps in a place where you didn't know many people or anyone at all, you can probably identify with the feeling of starting over. I know many of us, if not maybe all of us at some point in life have done that. And I was thinking about that. I was reflecting on years ago when my family moved here, and sort of remembering that time of doing some interviews, back doing a Skype interview before it was cool, back doing that sort of thing, and then coming and flying up for a time to visit and sort of interview and check out some things. And I remember thinking and even telling my wife, that it's sort of funny during that time, like some of these people that we're meeting, some of the people who are just names and faces to us now, years down the road, they will be people that we know. And I remember saying that and thinking, isn't that interesting? Like I remember Harley on the Skype call, and I can remember thinking back to that, and I'm going to know that guy. And now we play golf together. It's one of those things. I remember Troy and sort of emailing with him about working out the details of coming up here, and he was just this nice guy that I had just met, and now I know Troy. It's sort of these things we sort of start to know people, and when we move to those new places, those people become parts of our lives, integral parts of our identity in many ways, and we think about them when we think about our lives. And sometimes I think that God places us intentionally in one another's lives. Like he's got this plan, I think at times, that he causes our paths to cross because, as Proverbs 27 says, iron sharpens iron. We have an impact on one another. God is shaping us into who we need to be. He is shaping us for the purpose that he has called us to, and we each play a role in that in one another's lives, and I think that's pretty cool. And that's why I said last week, you can really start to get to know someone well by getting to know the people that are in their lives, because they shape who they are. And that's one of the things that we are getting at in this series that we started last week, that we are looking at the neighbors of the King. That is to say, the people that were in Jesus' life in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're trying to see Jesus through their eyes, see what they saw in him, and get a better understanding from their perspective of who Jesus is. And on the flip side of that, we're trying to see them through the eyes of Jesus, to see what Jesus was looking for when he was doing things with people, what he was looking for and what he was bringing out in the people that he met. And so we are looking at the people in Jesus' life. And this time in our story today, Jesus is moving to a new city. He is moving to a new place and going to be surrounded by new people. We see that happen here in Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. This follows right on the heels of Jesus' baptism and his 40 days in the wilderness being tempted. And then we get this. When Jesus heard that John the Baptist, a relative of his, had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, where he had grown up, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. To give you a sense of where that is, you can see on the map here, he grew up there in the middle in Nazareth, which is inland. You can see from both sides, it is inland. It is not a watery place like the right on the shore there in Capernaum is, but this is where he grew up. And we talked about last week, he grew up working with his father Joseph, probably doing some woodwork, stonework, some metalwork, doing some things that were craftsman kind of work. He was a builder, and when he reached this point in his life, he moved to Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The question that I want to ask you that maybe you haven't considered before is why? Why here? Why move here? There's something to teach us about this new thing that God is doing in Christ just by looking at his move to this place and the people that he surrounds himself with there. Right here in Capernaum and on these shores is where Jesus spent the majority of his ministry. It's where he did most of his miracles. It's where he gave many of, if not most of, his most famous teachings. All of the parables that he would say, the Sermon on the Mount occurred in this area. And this is where he recruited his core disciples, the men who would become members of the 12 that we would eventually refer to as the apostles. This is where they came from, right in this region. And it started like this. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And so Jesus is walking along the shore here, and he recruits some fishermen. These are Jesus' first-round draft picks of his leadership team. These are the first people that Jesus says, "Hey, you, come follow me." These are people that are going to be part of Jesus' inner circle. They're just meeting now, and I can imagine at this point, Jesus is a name and a face that they perhaps recognize. Maybe they've heard some of his teachings around the area, but soon they will know him very well. They will come to have their lives defined by their time with him. Jesus picks these fishermen. Have you ever wondered, why does Jesus choose fishermen? Why? I think it's intentional. I don't think he just happens to be in this location and happens to see some people that he thinks, maybe those guys. I don't think it's like that. I think he is intentionally going to this place looking for followers, looking for fishermen. We're going to see in our story today, we're going to see 4 followers, all of them fishermen. And it seems from reading some of the other texts, it seems like at least 7 of the 12 were fishermen, at least to some extent. And possibly all of them had at least some experience fishing. And I think that's interesting that he makes that choice. Why? He goes to recruit these guys that are from a city called Bethsaida. Bethsaida means house of fishing or hunting. It means house of fishing. This was a fishing village. That's what it was built for. It was there for fishermen. He set up shop. He lived in Capernaum, which was another fishing village. Jesus intentionally went to a place where that's what there was. Fishermen are who Jesus is looking for. And I'll start by saying this. In these few humble fishermen, Jesus saw the leadership his church would need to grow throughout the world. What did he see in them? In these guys, he saw the leadership that his church would need. This is incredibly demanding work that these guys did. Incredibly challenging. You had to be tough. This wasn't a profession for wusses. You had to be a tough person to be able to do these kinds of things. They were physically strong, but they were also gone for long, long hours, often overnight fishing. By the way, they had to fish often at night because they didn't have the kinds of materials that we have for their nets like we have today that are synthetic and invisible to the fish underwater. They had to go at night when it was dark and the fish couldn't see the nets. So often that's what we see them doing, going at night. So they were gone. They came home after those long fishing trips smelling probably worse than the fish that they caught. This was dirty work. And this is who Jesus chose to be among his leaders. He did go to and preach at the synagogue, but he didn't go to the synagogue to pick out the leaders from the synagogue there. He didn't go and find some of the top Pharisees and the experts of the law and say, hey, you guys come be the leaders of my movement. He chose fishermen. He wasn't looking for education. He wasn't looking for eloquence. He wasn't looking for sophistication. He wasn't looking for wealth or positions of influence. He chose fishermen. I know I keep saying this, but it stood out to people, especially when those fishermen started teaching. I showed you this verse last week, and now we'll look at it again. These same guys, when they are out preaching and the leaders are telling them to stop, and it says, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished. Jesus' choice of these guys and their accomplishment in doing it blew everybody's minds. They were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. Last week, I told you in the life of Joseph that ordinary people are powerful tools in the hands of God to accomplish extraordinary things. We saw that in the life of Joseph. We see that again in the lives of these fishermen. But it's more than that. It's more than that. It's more than it's just this humble profession, because there's plenty of humble professions to choose from, and he chose this one. He didn't choose other carpenters/builders like himself. What's I think most astounding, if you stop and think about it, is he didn't choose the one you might expect. He didn't choose shepherds. Think about this. Throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, it is shepherd after shepherd after shepherd after shepherd that God chooses to be the leaders of the things that God is doing. You ever notice that? Time and again, we have Abraham, Isaac, we have Jacob, we have Moses, we have David, all of them shepherds. Fishing is like not a thing in the Old Testament. It never shows up. The only story where a fish features prominently is the story of Jonah. And it's the fish that's doing the catching, right? People just generally didn't fish. Instead, they were shepherds. But Jesus comes along and he chooses fishermen. And there's one passage, though, in Jeremiah chapter 16. This is in the midst of proclaiming the exile that's coming and then pointing to a new day after that. There's this prophecy. Behold, I am sending for many fishers, declares the Lord, and they shall catch them. He's talking about how he's going to bring his people back. He's going to catch people to bring into his kingdom. And afterward, I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill and out of the clefts of the rock. Isn't that interesting? Pointing to this new day where God was going to be doing a new thing, he uses this imagery of fishers going out and catching the people. And so Jesus coming along and choosing these fishermen is signaling that this is a new phase of God's plan. God is up to something new, but it's the thing that he's always been building towards. He is doing something new, and now he is going to make these guys fishers of men, not shepherds, because shepherds typically didn't go out and catch more sheep. That would be cattle theft. Instead, they were given a flock, and they were charged to care for that flock and take care of the ones that were theirs. And certainly, Jesus uses some imagery of shepherds. He refers to himself as the great shepherd, right? That's in there, but this signals that this is something beyond that. It's not just about maintaining the flock anymore. It is about catching new fish. Fishermen cast a net and bring in as many fish as they can. So let's explore what these original disciples, these fishermen, still have to show us today. What did Jesus see in them? What were the attributes of fishermen that the church can still learn from, can still be led by all these years later? To go back to it again, Jesus says to them, to Peter and Andrew, he says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Immediately. Does that surprise you? Like if you just imagine that you don't know the story and you're just encountering this, and it's like Jesus comes along and says, "Hey, follow me," and immediately they drop it. They leave and they go and they follow him. This is a huge, life-altering decision that is in front of them. I remember when I was just getting out of college, and I was looking for my first full-time job, and I went to a few interviews, but went to one that was seeming to go well, and things were coming together, and having that final meeting, and Annie was there with me, and they made an offer for the job. And I had in mind, like, sort of what we had in mind. We had talked about what we expected maybe would be what we would take if they made an offer, and they offered a lot more than we had expected. And so, I remember kind of cutting my eyes to Annie and like, play it cool, but of course, didn't want to seem too eager, so we're like, well, we'll talk about it, and we'll think about it, and we'll get back to you and see if we can make that work, and that kind of thing. But as soon as we got in the car, we were like, can you believe it? So, but even, in those times, we're like, we're going to need to think about this, right? And that sometimes when we're making big decisions, that's the approach that seems responsible. And yet when we see these guys faced with this major decision in life, it says, immediately. Immediately, there was no like, Jesus, let's check with our families and make sure that Peter's not like, I got to go home and tell my wife about this and make sure that it's okay. And no, immediately they follow. They waste no time. And this was, make no mistake, this is not just about leaving some nets behind. This is leaving a livelihood behind, leaving their family, leaving this business behind. Later on, Peter would say to Jesus, we have left everything to follow you. He told Jesus that. We have left everything and followed you, Matthew 19:27. And so what we can learn from them is these fishermen know what it means to be prepared to act immediately when there was an opportunity to make a catch. This is part of their life as fishermen. It's not that they're merely impulsive, but it's part of their lifestyle that's woven into how they think as fishermen. When there was a fish to catch, they had to act fast. They had to act fast when there was fish to catch. To give you some imagery of what their lives were like, this is obviously a modern fisherman. But this is on the Sea of Galilee, using a net similar to what Peter and the gang would have been used to. This is, of course, made with modern materials. But theirs would have had weights around the perimeter of it that it would sink to the bottom. They would throw it over a school of fish when they would come by. They would throw it over them, and it would sort of snag them from the top down. And then one of them would have to dive in to go down and gather up the net and bring it back to the surface. That's what they would do. But they could not control the fish always. They didn't have the radar on their boats to see where the fish were. They had to use some other techniques. They had to be familiar with these things. By the way, the fish that they would have been catching like this were something they called musht, which is like a sort of tilapia. And if you go to that region today, basically every restaurant around the Sea of Galilee has that for sale, and they refer to it as St. Peter's fish. That's what it's locally known as. So anyways, that's what they would fish for. They had to learn where the fish tended to gather, and often it was hard to see from the boat. And they would use a spotter from the shore. Somebody who could call out when they could see a school of fish, a shadow of a school of fish out in the water, and they could say, look, they're over there. Cast your net over there. They're used to that kind of thing. That's why when Jesus comes along at the end of John, this is right after the resurrection, and the guys are out fishing again, and they don't know it's Jesus. It says, John 21:4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. His disciples didn't know that it was Jesus, and Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it's the Lord. Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord and put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. And so you see, it's a miraculous moment, but at the very beginning of it, the reason that it doesn't strike them that, oh, that's Jesus right at first, is because this is the way things typically worked. It was common to have a spotter from the shore to shout out where the fish were so that they could cast their net in that direction. And so at first, it doesn't seem like anything unusual is going on. And so they did it. And by the way, the fact that Peter is stripped down, is showing you what I just told you. They would dive down to gather up the net, and he was prepared to do that. That's what they've been doing. But as soon as they would see this school of fish, they had to act fast. This was part of their livelihood. We can learn from that sense of urgency. Somebody says, there's the fish, you cast the net. There's no time to ask too many questions. They had a readiness to act. The church can still learn from that, right? To recognize, to learn to recognize, to see when there's a need and help. Like, waste no time, but see a need and help. Recognize someone who is hurting and immediately offer comfort. See where the fish are and cast the net. Notice when somebody needs to know the good news about Jesus and be ready to share. Or simply offer a simple moment of Christ-like kindness. You never know where that might lead. We need to have our eyes open for the schools of fish that are right within reach. They may be schooling around our boat, and we don't even notice. We need to cast the net. Peter from the story, later on would write to the church, and he would say many things. Among them, he would say, in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. He said, always be prepared. That's a fisherman. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, and do this with gentleness and respect. But always be prepared. Live lives that demonstrate a hope that you have. When the fish are there, be prepared. Be prepared to cast the net. Be prepared to give an answer. And we can maybe learn to recognize that missions are all around us. Missions are not just sending support to a ministry halfway around the world. We should do that, and that's wonderful. But there are missions all around us. And we have the opportunity to shine the light of Christ in our everyday encounters. Just a little here and there. You never know what that tiny flickering candle of light in our life might mean to somebody, what it might do to ignite something bigger. Paul said, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. The days can slip away from you. Make the most of every opportunity. And I can tell you, I have let too many opportunities slip by. I have. There have been times where I've been busy and didn't notice that there was something that was needed. There's been times where I did notice, but I didn't feel like putting in all of the effort, or maybe I didn't think I was up to the task in front of me. How about you? Has that ever been you? And I bring that up not to make us all feel guilty or something, but to open our eyes, to recognize that there are opportunities. There are small daily ways that God may lead us to participate in a catch that we didn't expect. If we're listening, Jesus may say, hey, cast your net over there. And we may be surprised what comes up. And so these fishermen, these leaders they're ready to act immediately when there is an opportunity. 2, they didn't simply wait for the fish to come to them. They used their skills to go to the fish. Sometimes when I just think about fishing, I'm not really a fisherman myself. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but my mental image is of sitting on like a dock or something in a lawn chair, and sort of just having something cast out in the water and just sort of chilling, right? And waiting. You've selected some bait that's on the hook. You got a bobber out there waiting for it to go under, and you're just waiting, just enjoy. That sounds kind of nice, just sort of chilling, relaxing, enjoying the day or the evening, and waiting. That is a type of fishing, but that is not the type of fishing that we see these guys in the New Testament doing. Generally, that's not what they did for these type of fish and the level that they were doing it. There is one time where there's a story of Peter casting a hook and catching a fish. It's the story where he finds the coin in the fish's mouth to pay the temple tax. That's the only time that we see in the New Testament. Every time else, they fish with nets, right? They fish with these nets. I already told you they often had to do this at nighttime so that the fish couldn't see the nets. But they had several different types of nets. One of them was a trammel net. It was a multi-layered net that the fish could become entangled in. And so they would sort of spread them out, sort of like a wall of net under the water. And then they would go and sort of frighten the fish to swim toward the net. And the fish would become entangled in it, and they would haul it in. They could use that to sort of corral the fish into a certain area and then use that cast net over the school of fish to then dive down and catch them. These guys understood the fish. They understood how they acted. They understood where they went. They understood what would work. And they went to where the fish were. The fish didn't come to them. They went to the fish. Jesus said in Luke 19, he said, "I came to seek and to save the lost." Seek and to save the lost. What can we learn from that? At the conclusion of Matthew's gospel, as fishers of men, Jesus sent them out to the people. He said, these are the last words in the Gospel of Matthew, to the 11 disciples, because Judas was no longer with them. They went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." The command there, the command word, is go. Go. He doesn't tell them to simply hang a sign out front saying, if you need anything, come on in. There's a place for that, okay? There's a place for that. The church can often get into a habit of only having an attractional approach. Like just come to us. But perhaps we would benefit from having a more missional approach. I think it's two-pronged. I think there is room for a come and see kind of approach. That's one thing that Jesus does, come and see, but also a go and show. It's not either or, it's both. Come and see and also go and show. And what does go and show look like? It might look like having a Bible study with your neighbor. Maybe. But it also may be simply intentionally demonstrating the character of Jesus everywhere we go with a readiness to answer, to give the reason for the hope that we have. That is taking the net to the fish. Going and finding those opportunities for us to act immediately on and praying that God will put those things in our paths and not just waiting for people to come to us. And so I would invite you to prayerfully consider ways that we can go and show. If you have ideas, I know for a fact that our elders want to hear it. I know that I want to hear it. And Jordan wants your leadership here wants to hear if you have ideas about going and showing Jesus in our community. Let's talk about it. Let's find a way to make these things happen, because I believe there is still a great catch to bring in. So after Jesus recruits Peter and Andrew, the story continues. And going on from there, Jesus saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, James and John. In the boat with Zebedee, their father, they're mending their nets. He called to them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So once again, we see this immediate response from these guys who hear the call of Jesus and they go. Jesus here is quickly growing his ministry team. He's growing his leadership, and he chooses James and John, who he would later give the nickname the Sons of Thunder to. He chooses them. These are two guys who regularly partnered with Peter and Andrew. They knew each other. They worked together in the fishing trade. In fact, in Luke, they refer to them as their partners. And so he grows the ministry right away this way. And this right here, we see another vital attribute of fishermen that the church still needs. They act immediately. They take the nets to the fish. And last, they rely on one another. They coordinate their efforts, which leads to a greater catch and an easing of the load by sharing their burden. This is why we have the church. We share the load. These guys helped each other set up their trammel nets. They helped each other to bring them in. There are other nets that were even bigger that just dragged all the way to the shore and scooped up all the fish they could. Nobody could do that alone. They worked on these things together. It's a reminder to us. This is the way it's supposed to be. If we ever feel, when I'm telling you, we want to have opportunities that we act immediately on, and we want to take the nets to the fish, and you start thinking about, wow, that sounds overwhelming. I don't know if I can do that. If you feel that, recognize that we've never been intended to do this on our own. Like we have the church, we have a family of believers that are supposed to be in this boat together, doing this, helping each other. We are blessed with a family. I've said it before, most of the New Testament, really most of the Bible, is not written to individuals. Sometimes that doesn't come across in English because the word you can be singular or plural in English, unless you're from the South and you say y'all, then you get that. But most of the yous in the Bible are actually y'alls. Right? They are intended to address a group of people and calling that group to do something. And Paul says to the Galatians 6:2, he says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Work together, bear each other's burdens. You don't need to carry that net alone. And we urge you, to the Thessalonians, we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with them all. Help each other get to work. And be patient. Help each other. And in Ephesians, he says, he makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. We are meant to work this together. We are meant to share the load, which is more than merely attending a service. It is being in each other's lives. It is sharing in koinonia, as we've talked about before, that Greek word for community. And honestly, when I think about that, I recognize I don't know what I would do without my church family. Andy and I have talked about that many times. Especially when around the times when our kids were born and big events like that. I don't know how people get by without having people around them supporting them and helping them and encouraging them. It's tough out there. It's especially tough to do it on your own. It is vital. Fishing for men can be a daunting task. And you can imagine a fisherman stepping up to the edge of the Sea of Galilee and being told, look at this whole sea. Go out there and catch the fish. That's a big responsibility, but if you recognize, no, just you are going to catch the fish near you. And you're going to have a whole team of people helping you to share the load. That is another story. We can do that by God's power with his help and with each other. And so they were prepared to act immediately, and they took the nets to the fish, and they relied on one another. Those are at least three things that I can see that we can learn from. But one more thing. Go back to the story again and see Jesus says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And once again, let's look at this again. Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Why? Why did they leave immediately to follow him? Why were they so willing to leave behind everything they had for this guy that called them along the beach? Why? What did they see in Jesus? We can make some educated guesses about why they were so willing to do that, maybe understanding a little bit about what their upbringing would have been like. As kids, they would have attended school at the synagogue. Their education was focused around the Hebrew Scriptures. That's what they went to school for. And so by the age of 10, they would have the entire Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy memorized. By the age of 10, every word memorized. Then after that, if they were doing well and they could continue on, or they could leave at that point and just go into the family business or something like that. But if they were good enough, they would continue on and they would learn for the next few years the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures and memorize the rest of them over the next several years. And some of them would still be working in family business also along that same time. And then after that, many of them would leave the school. They were done. But those who excelled in that would apply to be a disciple of a rabbi. They would go and they would apply. They would say, I want to follow you and learn from you. And the rabbi would quiz them and see if they were good enough. And to follow the rabbi was not just to hear what the rabbi would say and learn it and say, okay, I'll remember that and see you tomorrow, rabbi. It was leaving their homes and going and living alongside that rabbi day after day and trying to not just know what he knows, but to do what he does. That's what it meant to be a rabbi. Many of them did not make the cut. They would apply and be rejected. But if the rabbi chose them, he would say, "Come, follow me." And so these guys, they're out fishing because apparently they're not following another rabbi. They had not been chosen by anyone else to come and to follow. And then they see this rabbi, a rabbi who I am almost certain that they have heard teaching, that they have seen some of the things he's already doing. And then he comes along and he says, "Come, follow me." And so they saw something in him. They saw a rabbi that was saying to them essentially, "I believe that you can do what I do. I believe that you can come and follow me." They saw a rabbi that believed in them unlike any of the others they had been around. In Jesus, those fishermen saw a rabbi who would lead them to places that they never dreamed or perhaps they had given up on. And so, of course, they followed. Of course, they followed. He chose them. Of all people, he chose them. Much later in life, the youngest of the group, John, wrote, and I encourage you, having all this in the back of your mind, read the letters of John, 1 John. Read it. Among the things he says this: "See what kind of love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God." And so we are. He felt this privilege of being chosen among all people to be God's children. And the truth is, what I want us to latch onto at the end of this message here today is that he chose us too. He chose us to be his children. He comes along and invites us to follow, invites us to come and do what he does, to go where he goes, and to be fishers of men too. So may we respond as they did. May we waste no time, and may we follow him. Amen. May God open doors to cast our net in big and small ways both, and may he fill us with the strength to follow through on those things. And let us support, let us admonish and encourage one another as we live out this calling. There's a great catch out there.